lead us not into temptation. The word used for temptation also refers to testing. And to think on these words, I felt I just had to come to the desert. That's the classic place of testing. Now, Jesus knew temptation and testing. We're told in Scripture that He was tempted and tested in all ways that we are, and yet without sin. A critical test for Jesus came at the beginning of His ministry. That's when He battled the evil one for 40 days and 40 nights alone in the desert wilderness. It left Him so exhausted that Scriptures also tell us that angels came to minister unto Him. The desert is a place of harsh and forbidding beauty. It is a place of intimidation and yet intimacy. Here, you can feel totally exposed and at the same time, completely embraced. Here, God peels off of us layers of accumulated baggage. Here, we are severely reminded that we're dependent and vulnerable. There's no need for our usual act or any phoniness. There's no one to impress. On the other hand, there's no need for inhibitions. No one is going to ridicule you. Sing as loud as you want. Cry whenever you need to. The desert can also become a metaphor for those times when we feel like we're lost in an endless wasteland. And that's happened to me 3 times. One of which was a huge failure in my life that undermined my confidence for over 10 years. But now, I almost feel like I'm ready for the desert. I've come to believe that deserts can be good places. The wasteland can be transformed. The desert, historically, has been a special place of spiritual battle and a place of discovery, and we can be changed by our experience of our own desert. We can find a refreshing oasis. We can find a way to make it feed our spirit rather than dehydrate and scorch us. The words, "lead us not," in the prayer express a confidence that God can and will lead us, and that we need His leading in our lives. But it's also a confession that we're not sufficient in ourselves. We're inclined to slip up, to do things and say things that we'll regret later. So in praying this, we're unashamedly asking God, as He leads us, to take into account our vulnerabilities and weaknesses. We also need to take into account the rest of the sentence. It says, "Deliver us from evil." This passage can also be translated as, "Deliver us from the evil one." Many of us have had those times when we felt assaulted by the presence of evil itself and by satanic forces. And this part of the prayer recognizes that that is a real threat, and it pushes us to move against such evil and the evil one. But the powers of darkness don't let go easily. They'll do everything they can to knock us off course. We also know the damage that severe sickness and disease can inflict upon us. We know the lonely, agonizing hours of the night when we ask, how much can we bear the pain? We wonder, will it ever go away? We know that the discouragement comes when we can't do things the way we used to, or the feeling of taking one step forward, only to be thrown 2 steps back. And it's precisely at those points that this part of the prayer reminds us to call upon the mercy and the strength of the Lord, to face what we have to face, and somehow get through it. And there we will find His presence. And regarding the tests we face, Scripture assures us that God will not allow us to be tried or tempted above that which we are able, but He will, with the temptation, provide a way of escape that we may be able to bear it. God will be there as we seek Him, and He'll be there as we face whatever's before us. And what is before us can be anything from finding complete recovery to enduring a chronic situation where we just have to learn to accept certain limitations, to preparing for our final days and then to move on to the next life. I set aside some weeks to prepare for this program, but that time turned into a nightmare with the repeated hospitalizations I mentioned earlier. Over and over during this time, I was ready to just abandon the whole thing. In fact, as one trial piled in upon another, it was as close as I've ever come to despairing of life itself. But then, reading how even the Apostle Paul had such moments where he was ready to give up, it took on a different light. In the midst of despair, I found God's hand of deliverance. Here's what Paul said: "We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so we despaired even of life. Indeed, in our hearts we felt the sentence of death. But this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. He's delivered us from such a deadly peril. He will deliver us. And on Him we've set our hope that He will continue to deliver us, even as you continue to help us by your prayers." Sometimes all we can do is hang on in our weakness and plead, "Lead us not to temptation, but deliver us from evil." And surprisingly, that plea from the pit, that plea from our weakness, can become our place of great strength.